Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen speaking. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. This one is about my views on exposure therapy, essentially what I think about exposure therapy. The reason I'm making this particular vlog piece is that I recently saw a thread on Facebook where someone asked the question, what do you agree with exposure therapy? And I was kind of dismayed by reading many comments from people in the NLP and hypnosis field where they were completely damning exposure therapy, saying stuff like it's ineffective, it doesn't work, it makes things worse, and it's cruel, and it never has its place. Now, this is not really a fence-sitting issue anymore. Most of these claims are factually wrong. They're way more wrong than they are right. And reading them was a bit like taking a trip back down memory lane for me, as arrogant as that might sound, because I used to hold similar opinions early on in my change work career. I remember very clearly the first time I actually had to resort to doing exposure therapy with a phobia client, and it felt like a failure. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a sellout. Exposure therapy is not sexy. It's not sophisticated. It's not cool. And here I had this client where I had attempted to do all this NLP stuff and nothing had really taken. And we ended up doing exposure therapy for a fear of heights. And despite me feeling like a fraud and feeling like I kind of sold out, it worked. The exposure therapy actually worked where all the attempts at doing hypnotic work and NLP-based patterning had not worked. And that was a wake-up call for me because I discovered that I had kind of taken on faith some notions that are very common in many NLP and hypnosis community, where exposure therapy is completely looked down upon. And there is some justification for that, meaning that if you have a NLP background or a hypnosis background, and you see clients, you have very likely had the very weird experience of living in a world where so many psychologists and psychiatrists and so-called experts and the public, share the view that the way to get over some phobia is to do systematic gradual desensitization or flooding, which may be somewhat painful and may take some time. And you have had the direct experience that people have changed in like 5 minutes during doing some very simple NLP patterning. And you've taken the client out to the live context and you've verified the results, and you speak to the clients months later and the results are still there. And you kind of scratch your head going, what's up with these guys? Why aren't they doing stuff that really, really works? So this is a valid complaint. The truth is that there are, for a lot of people, easier, more sophisticated ways of working with phobias than exposure therapy. It is true that sometimes you can help people in virtually minutes using NLP patterning. It is true that you can sometimes help people with deep-rooted trauma and phobias by using psychosensory therapies such as havening in a few minutes. It is true that you can often do profound work using various forms of hypnotic regression work with phobia clients. And I've discovered in recent years, by viewing phobias as a psychological illusion and helping them kind of see through the illusion, this for me is the preferred way of working. It has the least downsides. Most people can relate to it. So all of this is true. Now, at the same time, there's nothing I haven't been able to fail with in my 21-year-old change work career. I have, there's nothing I haven't had a lot of success with phobias, and there's nothing that I haven't had a lot of failures with phobias. Using NLP patternings, I've had everything from strong, solid, instant changes almost to people not responding at all. I've had the same with hypnotic work. I've had the same with psychological illusion work. I've also had the same with exposure therapy work. I've had the same with havening. I've had the same with EFT and TFT and rational emotive behavior therapy style methods. And the thing is this. The magic doesn't really lie in the technique or in the format. Although, this is a partial truth in that there clearly are ways of working with particular issues that are, on average, way more effective than others. Psychoanalysis is not the method of choice for working with a phobia. So I'm not saying that the method or the technique doesn't matter, but what I am saying is that the power ultimately lies in the client's ability to meaningfully respond to the instructions, to the suggestions. If you propose something, if you suggest something, if you set up some sort of experiment, some sort of ritual, and the client is able to make sense out of, respond to that in a meaningful way, then kudos to you, to the both of you. You got something. If the client isn't able to respond meaningfully to it, it doesn't matter how nice your theory is. The client isn't able to meaningfully respond to it. Now, are there often subtleties, tricks of the trades, tweaks, things you can do to kind of adapt it to help a particular client respond? Yes. This is where your skill level and your experience and your creativity and your ability to think strategically comes in. So that is true. It doesn't matter. Your skill level, your experience does matter. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can have all the tweaks in the world. The client just doesn't process that way. They're just not able to make sense out of experience in that way. Now, in an utopian world, you can create theories that says that everyone can do it, and while this is probably not true, a lot of people may be able to do it over time. But if you're running a practice seeing live clients, the real issue is, what can the client actually do right now? And if you get pragmatic about it, you will see that some people just won't be able to respond meaningfully to what you present. The framework that you're doing, it may not match their beliefs. They may have very strong beliefs about how change is supposed to happen, or they may lack particular abilities. So, for example, if you're going to do a VK dissociation, the standard NLP patterning for a phobia, you need for the client to have pretty clean and clear memory access. You need good ability to visualize in conscious awareness. You need good skills at absorption. You need good skills at dissociation. You need a certain concentration power to be able to deliberately keep charge of your own internal imagery in that way. A lot of people just don't have that. May they improve with some training? Some of them surely. Some of them probably not. So what I have discovered over time is that for some phobia clients, Exposure therapy in its various forms is the method of choice. For some people just won't respond to the stuff that is more psychologically oriented. And based upon their way of processing information, their beliefs, their tendencies, exposure therapy may be the method of choice. And what I've found pretty consistently is that for the people who don't respond well to the typical NLP and hypnosis stuff, exposure therapy usually works quite well. So, as I said, for some people, it is the preferred method of choice. So you better have it in your toolbox. It's not sexy. It's kind of crude. It's not sophisticated, but I urge you to prioritize pragmatism over ideology. You know, take how you would like the world to look. Take your pet theories and put them aside a little bit, and be willing to be completely pragmatic. If you do that, you will get results with at least some clients that you are currently striking out with. Now let's look at a few of the claims of the people on that forum. These are claims that are often made by people, so I'm addressing it. First of all, the claim that exposure therapy just doesn't work and is inefficient. This is not true. Well, it's true some of the time for some people, but it's not true for all people at all times. And there is actually quite a bit of scientific studies showing that exposure therapy for a lot of clients is effective in overcoming a phobia. The evidence is quite strong. So if you go around saying that it never works and that it always makes stuff worse, you're not being intellectually honest, or you're just misinformed. So read up on stuff, a little bit. The idea that it's cruel, this is of course a projection of mind, attributing cruelness to as the intent of someone who does exposure therapy with someone. So let's evaluate whether it's cruel. Now, if I see a client based upon my experience, and the client doesn't seem to be able to meaningfully respond to the typical stuff that I do that is more sophisticated and easier on both of us, but this client seems to match up well with previous clients who have responded well to exposure therapy, and the client is committed and motivated to do it, that's a good decision on my part, and the intent is to help. So given that it's an informed decision based upon a lot of experience with similar cases, and the intent is to help, there's no cruelty in the intent. Now, I've never had a client become damaged by exposure therapy. I've had people not resolve their fears, but I've had that with all sorts of approaches of working. So I've never had anyone become an emotional cripple or suffering severely after exposure therapy. The worst I've ever experienced is someone essentially being in the same place when they came in. And in most of the instances where I, as a strategic decision based upon experience, do exposure therapy, we get the results in the vast majority of those cases. So being that the intent is to help, and in most cases we do get the results, which we otherwise didn't get, that's not cruelness. That's effectiveness. That's ethical change work. And the idea that it's unnecessarily hard on the client, I've never, knock on wood, in 21 years, and I've had a lot of weird responses, but I have never ever had a phobia client say, look, this exposure therapy helped me over my phobia, but it was so painful and so cruel that I would rather have not done the exposure therapy and have my phobia. In every single case where exposure therapy succeeded, it was worth the temporary suffering. So this is something to be aware of. Now here's something else. If you're not behind the keyboard, if you're actually seeing clients for a living, if you're actually doing this stuff in the real world, you will have discovered something else. And that is the strategy of evoking the fear in the office by asking the client questions about the phobia and evoking memories to prove to the client that they can access the state through their thinking is great. It's a great one. And if you can help a client really access the state in the office, and then after your particular intervention they're no longer able to do it, that's in most cases a huge convincer for the client. And in most cases that holds up, meaning if your client comes in with some phobia or some sort of anxiety, and when they think about it and they talk about it and they imagine it, they feel a lot of fear, and then after your particular work together they feel calm or they feel excited or they're really looking forward to doing it, that is most of the time an accurate predictor that the client will remain in a resourceful state once they enter the real life context. So it's really worth doing, and it's not always the case. If you actually have some experience, you will have had clients who have had that particular response. They've suddenly felt great or calm in the office. They've been convinced that the phobia is gone, and then they enter the real life context and they're still phobic. If you have a lot of experience, you have had these cases. So what do you do then? So if you are thorough, meaning that you actually take your clients out to real life context and you do the testing, let's say with heights or spiders or elevators and stuff like that, well, if you're on the spot with the client and they still have some anxiety or some fear, do exposure therapy. You're in the context. It often doesn't take much. And in these cases, it's seldom the case that the client is as phobic or as anxious that they used to be. It's usually a reduction, but it's not quite there. Now, there's another element here too that's important, and that is sometimes when you do the work with someone, they may feel completely calm and reassured in the office, and then you take them, for example, to the elevator, and they start feeling some arousal in their physiology. Now, this is one reason why you want to do real-life testing with them if you can, because it's very easy for a lot of people to then interpret those body sensations as evidence that they're still anxious and then take off. And the work was suddenly a failure. But what a lot of these people will discover is that it's actually not fear or a phobia or anxiety that they're experiencing. It's just a sort of anticipation, meaning they haven't been in an elevator for 15 years, so there's some anticipation there of how will that go. And if you can, if the person says something like that, oh, I'm starting to feel, if you can frame it that way and set up that expectation, and you go into the elevator with them, what most often happens is that after a few seconds, maybe 20, 30 seconds, or 1 minute, they discover that, the fear really is gone. It was just kind of an anticipation. But those body sensations can feel identical or very similar to the old anxiety that they might have had. So hadn't you been there to coach them in that particular way, they may have interpreted those initial signals as signs that they're still scared and taken off, and suddenly the work is a failure. So this is really important as well. This, of course, is also a very strong argument that people who do exposure therapy and who market that as the solution for phobias are also factually incorrect. The truth is that there are ways of working with phobias that, for most people, most of the time, are more efficient, are quicker, and are easier on both the client and the helper. So there's really no excuse these days, if you're seeing phobia clients for a living, to not know how to do those things. I mean, the people who don't know how to do these things are not being pragmatists. They're not being curious. They're not being serious professionals. They're being run by orthodoxy and conformity and loyalty to a belief system, and very often a kind of not invented here syndrome, meaning that only the people in my tribe of experts that I belong to could ever think up anything of use. So if my teachers or my professors or my peers don't do it because we are the experts, it's obviously not worth doing. These aren't skeptics. These aren't really scientists. These are dogmatists in their thinking. So, but even if you're going to do exposure therapy, even if that is the choice, it really helps to be able to use language to work with expectations, to utilize responses, to be good at mindfulness meditation, to have a tool such as havening, or being able to do some anchoring or submodality work. It can really amplify and enhance the effect of your exposure therapy, even if exposure therapy kind of is your main tool, so to speak. So anyone who presents their one model, their one framework, their one technique as the end-all be-all is either misinformed or suffering from a severe case of confirmation bias, or just lying to you. It's just not true. Might be deliberate lying. It might be a shut eye, meaning a strong case of self-deception. Now, there's a final point I want to bring up here, and that is that some people listening to this might think, well, Jürgen, you clearly have a talent. You can make anything fail. This is just a matter of your incompetency and you not quite having the skills. This is probably not true. This is probably not true. And I base that on two things. I base it on a lot of experience, and at this point I attract clients from all over the world based upon reputation and based upon the results I'm able to help people achieve. So that is probably not the case. And another reason it's not the case is that I have had the chance to see many of the big elephants dance. I've seen John Grinder work. I've seen Richard Bandler work. I've seen many of the superstars in the field work, and I've seen them all fail. I've spoken to clients of these folks, and I've seen well-known NLPers and hypnotherapists as clients, and I've had as clients quite a few people who have seen well-known people in various fields having failed. So I know for a fact that the marketing hype just isn't accurate. So it's not just about your skill level. It's not the case that if you're not quite succeeding with a client, that the answer always lies in improving your skill level with that particular way of working. It's not true. That kind of assumes that the only thing that really matters is what you bring to the table in terms of your state and your skills and your abilities. It completely ignores the fact that it's whether the client is able to meaningfully respond that ultimately generates the changes. And if what you're asking and the client's ways of responding and making meaning, if the gap is too wide, it doesn't matter how much skill you have in that particular thing. It matters that you know to do something else. And that, of course, is also another skill set. So, till next time, take care.